When another update first released on Alpha, a few players noticed the SUBZERO WISP pet's relatively high base stats. They wondered, what happens if I put a textbook on this and get a Chimera Hyperion so the stats go on my hype as base stats, which then scale with kata? So I did the math and realized the Wisp is actually really good for RCM, but due to the extreme rarity of apexes, only 2 were crafted for a long time. One by Steelman, which has since been wiped, and one by Refraction, who did a test and decided the Wisp pet was not good. My goal today, however, is to do a more in-depth analysis of Wisp in high master mode floors, show how to correctly optimize for Wisp and why gdrag is still better, although you need to be very skilled at RCM to fully optimize your gdrag clear. Finally, shout out to Alphyboo for lending me his Chimera Hyperion for a while, and shout out to Kikius22 for making this absolute banger of a thumbnail that I will probably eventually use. Anyways, without further ado, let's get right into the video. Now, the beginning of this video is going to be a lot of talking about numbers with background footage of me RCMing M7, but I'll show actual M7 blood rushes later in the video to demonstrate how the Wisp performs against gdrag in addition to all the numbers. First of all, I want to show the Wisp's damage with every build versus the gdrag's damage with every build. These builds are Suspicious Estrella, Heroic Estrella, Suspicious Hyperion, and Heroic Hyperion. Suspicious doesn't actually add any EHP and is only used for Wither Shield, which can be balanced out by using Heroic and a Florid, so I'm going to remove 3 of the 4 Suspicious options. I'm leaving in the option for Suspicious Estrella RCM with gdrag, because if you only have one Wither Blade, it will typically be a Suspicious Estrella, because that's the best for other classes, and it will still work very fine for Mage. And additionally, if you have a second Wither Blade, it'll generally be a Chimera Wither Blade for LCM, RCM, or Burrs, and usually isn't simply an Estrella with another Reforge. So generally, if you have a gdrag, you'll be RCMing with a Suspicious Estrella, but there are other builds you can run, which we'll get to later. First of all, let's do a very simple examination of the straight up damage I was able to do in each test. I tested damage on Crypt Lurkers in M6 in the first room with no blessings and recorded results. Each run with an Estrella had a perfect Amethyst gemstone and a perfect Sapphire gemstone, while each Hyperion had 2 perfect Sapphires. What I got was that a gdrag with a Suspicious Estrella will do 34.6 million damage, a Heroic Estrella will do 36.5 million damage, and a Heroic Hype will do 43.5 million damage. A SUBZERO WISP with a Heroic Estrella will do 32 million damage, and a Heroic Hype will do 36.7 million damage. Now, at first glance, the Wisp looks straight up worse here, and this does support the calculations, as Wisp's never supposed to actually do more damage than gdrag, believe it or not. So why was Wisp ever supposed to even be good? Now, Wisp gives 600 health, 35 true defense, and 250 intelligence space stats. The textbook that makes this 500 intel, and if used with a Chimera weapon, the 600 health and 500 intel will scale with kata. Unfortunately, the true defense only scales with stars, not kata. This means the Wisp actually gives you 3,840 health in master mode with a 10-star weapon, which is a ton, and increases your EHP by a lot. Heroic and Suspicious do not change your EHP at all, so we will ignore Reforges for this next part of the test. I would also like to point out that I don't have full growth 7 and don't have Art of Peace on any of my armor pieces, and since these HP values scale with kata, they make a large difference in EHP. I will give an example of the difference this can make later in the video. With a gdrag, I get 775k EHP with an Estrella and 500k EHP with a Hyperion. With a Wisp pet, I get a whopping 1.12 million EHP with an Estrella and 733k with a Hyperion. Now, examining this, there are 2 things I'd like to point out. First of all, Heroic Estrella gdrag and Heroic Hype Wisp are practically the same in terms of both EHP and damage, with Wisp doing ever so slightly more and having ever so slightly less EHP. This means running a Hyperion with a Wisp is pointless, as it does the same thing as gdrag and Heroic Estrella while costing over 6 billion coins extra. If Intel scaled slightly faster such that this build with Wisp outclassed the build with gdrag in terms of damage, it would be worth it, and Hypixel could even consider a large intelligence buff on the Wisp instead to make it more viable, but in its current state, this is absolutely not a reason to get a SUBZERO WISP pet. Either change your hypes reforge or get a second hype if you want to run this damage / EHP and clear. Personally, I decided to change my hype to Heroic because the Suspicious bonus doesn't actually do much, because the reason you don't run a Scylla in the first place is because 99% of the time, you either need to hold the Estrella to be tanky or you're going to be swapping from your term as another class to get the Wither Shield, so Suspicious is not actually very necessary, so I like to run a Heroic Estrella now. The second build is probably the best part about this pet, which is a Heroic Chimera Estrella build. The absolute insane amount of EHP you get means you can RCM like a maniac and physically cannot die with literally any shred of an idea what you're doing. This build makes M7 RCM much more viable for beginner mages, as the increased damage of mobs on M7 has historically caused a lot of issues with RCM clear, leading to mages dying a lot on Blood Rush. However, losing this damage makes you unable to one-tap certain mobs with RCM, which causes you to have to spam much more to clear any pile of mobs. However, that's not the worst part. The biggest downside of this build is the relationship between strong mobs and mana. Strong mobs like zombie lords and zombie commanders will take a lot longer to kill due to the noticeably less DPS. Spells and Withermasters are also somewhat strong mobs, but they have a lot less EHP than others, so the time difference between these mobs is much more noticeable. The biggest problem with these mobs is mana though. Even with the increased mana given by Wisp and the 40% buff to mana regen, you can still run out of mana with the Chimera Estrella. Thus, mana conservation is a skill that a lot of mages will need to learn if they transition to the Wisp build, and I even recommend the possible purchase of an SOS Flare to aid mana regen. The large radius makes it viable on a dungeon blood rush unlike an orb would be, along with the low mana cost and the 125% mana regen, meaning you can regen your mana extremely fast, especially combined with the Wisp's 40% regen perk. I would recommend placing a flare whenever you get somewhat low on a longer blood rush, then continue RCMing like normal while you try and regen mana at the same time. However, SOS Flare is another 2.3 billion coins on top of the Wisp's already pricey 5 billion coin price tag, and a Chimera Witherblade going for about 3 bill plus on the AH for a good one. I also want to point out how gdrag and heroic hype can outdamage absolutely everything else I just talked about. Heroic hype gdrag RCM is hard to do, with the 500k EHP I get making you extremely prone to dying. As you can see, I have a lot of trouble RCMing with the setup. However, in all fairness, I have not done this much. There are very few people in the world who can RCM with the setup currently, one of them being a friend of mine, a #1 in Mage XP globally, Guskso04. For Gus and other people who can RCM consistently without dying in the setup, a Wisp is not worth it at all. The damage increase will lead to one-tapping most weak mobs, but not all, and again, this can vary on dungeon exploration and blessing buffs. However, this does speed up your general clear speed considerably, along with making stronger mobs pretty much melt. Finally, I would like to point out the difference between my gear and Hypermax gear. Gus gets almost 600k EHP with a heroic hype and 900k with an Estrella, compared to my 500k with heroic hype and 770k with an Estrella. Both of us have the same relevant gear, except I'm missing Art of Peace and 3 Growth 7s on my RCM set. Both tests were done without Legion. This 600k EHP with gdrag and heroic hype begins to make RCM with the setup actually pretty easy, so I would recommend players try and learn how to RCM with gdrag and heroic hype, especially if you have really low ping. Before I give my final conclusion on this video, I want to show you guys what gear I was using to get these results, so you can see how it will compare to your own gear. Both of my Witherblades have all the relevant enchants and modifiers at max level. My RCM gear is only missing 2 Mana Vampire 10s, 3 Growth 7s, and 4 Art of Pieces. My equipment is a Synthesizer V3, Vanquished Gas Cloak, Implosion Belt, and Gauntlet of Contagion. All equipment is reforged to Fortified and Recomped. Annihilation Cloak is generally better than Gas Cloak and can also be used with term setups, so I would recommend going for that as well at some point. I had Silky Talisman with speed tunings, enrichment, and an ability damage beacon with a Scorched Power Crystal. I have 1092 magic power and 1 billion coins in the bank. I have Kata 50 and Mage 50. Everything I didn't mention is Hypermax. All tests were done in an M6 on a Crypt Lurker in the first room with no blessings and no dungeon exploration as Mage class in a solo run. So is Wisp even worth it? Well, if you have high ping, it might be worth it to try and get a Wisp pet for the insane EHP with the Estrella build, but other than that, I don't see an amazing use for Wisp. gdrag hype RCM outclasses it by far, and it's way cheaper to Hypermax an RCM set than to buy a Wisp and a Chimera hype, and learning how to play with less EHP and more damage will make you a worse mage in the short term, but a far better one in the long term. Now, is Wisp more worth an SOS Flare? Honestly, yes, because Flare is borderline useless. It's useless in dungeons because you don't need the mana regen or the true defense or the life regen, and outside it barely does anything honestly, while Wisp at least gives a new EHP heavy RCM build, faster blaze times, and pet score. Also for Blaze Slayer, if you are having trouble without a flare, Warding Flare is easily enough to kill the boss. So no, I don't recommend going for Wisp unless you're on a sandbox profile, and even then, it's more of a flex than something actually useful. Now, do I personally regret my decision to go for one? No, because pet score.